Hey there, budgeteers. Are you ready to unlock the power of each payday and take control of your finances like a boss? Introducing the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits. This isn't your average budgeting tool. Oh no. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll harness the unique rhythm of your paychecks to supercharge your financial game. Say goodbye to the confusion of monthly budgets and hello to the clarity of every payday. You'll know exactly when money is coming in and when it's going out, giving you the edge you need to stay on top of your finances. But that's not all. With the Payday Power Planner, you'll easily spot whether you're rocking a surplus or facing a deficit. Armed with this knowledge, you'll make informed decisions that set you up for financial success. It's time to transform your relationship with money and create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom. Get your hands on the Payday Power Planner from New Money Habits today and start making every dollar count. Don't let financial stress hold you back. Create a better plan for your money and seize the power of your pay period and thrive with the Payday Power Planner. Visit newmoneyhabits.com now to grab your free copy and unleash your financial potential. On this episode of the New Money Habits podcast, we're going to explore prioritizing expenses with Maria Casillas, my partner and co-founder of New Money Habits. What's up, budgeteers, and welcome to the New Money Habits podcast. I'm your host and one of the co-founders of New Money Habits, Coach Nino. Today on the New Money Habits podcast, we're going to sit down with another co-founder. She is our behavioral expert who helps us figure out why you behave with money the way you do. Her name is Maria Casillas, and I'm excited to have her on today. If you have any questions, be sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits and follow us on your favorite podcast platform, or tell your smart speaker to play the latest episode of the New Money Habits podcast. If you want to help out the show, consider leaving a 5-star rating and review. We cannot thank you enough for leaving those 5-star ratings and reviews. They truly help us spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money. Now let's get into today's episode. Well, Maria, partner of mine, I cannot express with words how excited I am to have you on today and in subsequent episodes coming up. But today, I know we wanted to really focus in on helping our listeners with prioritization when they're spending their money, prioritizing, and helping that prioritization lead to identification of surplus or shortage and then managing that well. But there's also this paradigm of something that you and I talked about that kind of came to light, and that is there are a lot of people who think they know what they want. It's, I want to clean up the mess. I need a quick fix, whatever that is. But the other part of that, the more truthful part of that, is understanding what you actually want. Mm-hmm. And so, help.
Okay, well, I think part of that whole thing is we have been so conditioned by society to be this microwave world where we're used to getting what we want, what we think we want very, very quickly. And it's kind of turned into where we think that quick fix is the thing that we actually want. And I can just tell you through all the work I've done with behavioral stuff in whether it's, substance abuse counseling change or financial change, what people really want is something that's more sustainable for themselves. And so we had kind of had this conversation around, hey, what is it that our clients are actually looking for? And it kind of brought up this whole idea of, well, if we look at all of the marketing that's out there in all of the other people, all the other financial coaches that are out there, you see a lot of, done for yous, and you see a lot of, budget in less than 5 minutes, and a lot of the speak around that. And it's sexy. And so people are gravitating towards that. But what we're actually seeing is that once they spend that 5 minutes and that change isn't sustainable, then they're either equally upset and pained as they were when they started, or worse off than when they started. And we don't want that anymore. We want people to be able to see sustainable change. And so it just kind of started that discussion of, okay, so what do people actually want? Even though they think they want these things over here, what is it that they're actually looking for? And that is such an important part of today's discussion, because we know if we're having a surplus or we're having a deficit, in order to prioritize anything, we need to do that according to what it is that we want. And how do you do that unless you know what it is you want in the first place?
Okay. And so, right, we have to prioritize. And we have to prioritize based off of what we want, but how do we identify? If I'm sitting down at my budget and I'm looking at the numbers, how do I even begin to understand what it is that I really want? I know what I want is to clean up this mess. I've made a mess. I want to clean it up, but I don't. What do I do?
Well, one of the things that I think we really want to start with is identifying what's actually important to you. We say we want to clean something up. What we really want is for it to be cleaned. And because then I say that with a lot of conviction, because if somebody says, okay, well, if you want to clean this up, then here's all the things that you need to do in order to make that happen. And you're like, whoa, that's too much work. I'm not wanting to do that. Can we find that quick fix? And we go back to it. So what we actually want is for it to be cleaned.
Can I just sit in that for a second? Because you're speaking conviction to me in one of my own messes, that it's like, yes, I don't want a list of things to do to clean it up. I just want the mess cleaned up. So thank you. I needed a moment to sit in that.
My pleasure. Happy to do this. But when we figure that out, okay, so here's what we want. Why do we want that? And I know that, sometimes we get so stuck in the whole idea of like why X, Y, Z. And it's almost like a buzzword these days, but it is really important to decide why it is that you want that in the first place, because that's going to help provide the motivation that you need when it actually does get hard. So if you want the mess cleaned up, what are some of the reasons that you might want that cleaned up? Since I'm speaking to you, not even realize that I was speaking to you in conviction. Yeah. Whatever mess you're thinking about right now, what are some of the reasons that you want it cleaned up?
The number one reason is to honor my beliefs and my values.
Okay. And how would a cleaned up mess honor your beliefs and your values?
It would put things back in line, right? So right now I'm not walking directly with my values in a particular area, and I'm transparent. So it's time I come clean to our listening audience. I'm cleaning up a tax mess, and that's not fun. And so I want the mess cleaned, but I want that mess cleaned because it aligns with my values. The conviction comes from the value that I place in my faith that says, Jesus said himself, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? So I'm feeling this disconnect from my values where it's all like, okay, I've made this mess and I have not yet cleaned it up. It's time to clean it up.
Okay. I'm actually really impressed that you went that direction, because so many people would typically say, well, I'm stressed out. I mean, when you look at the marketing towards, cleaning up debt, for example, or cleaning up your taxes, I know I totally throw in this curveball at you because we did not discuss any of this ahead of time, but what is one of the top things that you see people talking about? What are they able to get rid of when they get rid of one of their messes?
Well, I don't know that I have a direct answer for that. I know that there's a lot of fear mongering, right? Okay. So when you're in debt, there's a lot of like perpetuating the fear so that they can then try to alleviate that fear for you. But it's like all you've done was flame the fires. So I think
so you see a lot of alleviating fear. I see a lot of alleviating stress. Like there's all the stress reduction and all that. And so if somebody says to me, well, I want to clean up this mess. I almost fell into that trap. I want this mess cleaned up because I'm so stressed out and I want less stress in my life. Well, that might be true, but the problem with that response, it's not that it's a wrong response. It's just that it's not a very productive response, because cleaning up the mess, which is ultimately what's going to happen, is stressful.
Yep.
We're not going to pretend that it's not stressful. So if you're trying to have a cleaned up mess so that you can alleviate stress, and then you're told that the solution to that problem is to have the stressful stuff happen to you, you're like, peace out. I can't do it.
Yep.
But because I was able to identify a why or reason that was a lot deeper than that. It was a lot more like, I want to be congruent with my values. And you said, my value is render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And there's probably a lot of stuff around that as well. We're going to still have stress around doing all of this. But right now you're not in alignment with your values, and having a cleaned up mess would make you in alignment with your values. But you don't have to be out of alignment with your values in order to make that happen. Does that make sense? So yes, like in the process. So in the process, you might be stressed, but you're not going to be out of alignment in your values in the process of doing the realignment.
Right.
So I think that's one of the biggest reasons we need to understand what it is that is important to us. Because if we don't know, and we're just going with all the buzzwords that are out there, and it's all based on like this, I don't know, fleeting feeling, and it's all emotionally based. It's like, okay, but you're going to have all those emotions going through the process also. So it's not deep enough in order to actually make that change possible for yourself.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I kind of want to say some of that back just to process it, and for our listeners to process it in a similar way. My tax situation does cause me stress. Absolutely. And would I like that stress to go away? Absolutely. But to your point, I knew going through the process of cleaning it up was going to be stressful, right?
Maybe even more so than what it is because oftentimes just our human behavior it's easier to deal with the comfortable discomfort, the known discomfort, than it is to understand the unknown and to deal with the unknown, because there's going to be discomfort either way. But if you can choose the one that you already know what's expected, you're like, well, at least I know what's expected. Whereas on the other side, it's like, I could clean up a mess, but I don't know what's expected. And quite frankly, I'd rather just sit here in my own self, in my own poopy diaper, and that's just human behavior. It's not awesome, but it's something we have to deal with.
Yeah. And I want to make the tie that, as you pointed out, right, the motivation is something much more deeper. It's something that I'm so anchored to, right, that it's not some fleeting feeling of like, it would be great to get out of the stress. Well, avoidance could get me out of the stress too. And that
temporarily, at least.
Yep. And so I really appreciate that perspective, because we've been talking, I know that in recent episodes, I've been talking a lot, and I've had conversations with others about aligning your spending with your values. But when we're talking about prioritizing, it's the same thing. We still have to bring the values piece into the equation to say what rises to the top and what falls to the bottom or even falls off, because it's not aligned to our values, and therefore it's not a priority, and therefore it shouldn't be prioritized. Hey there, budgeteers. Good news can only be good news if there's bad news. So what's the bad news? The bad news is you and I have a deadly disease called sin, and this disease causes us to rebel and disobey God. See, God is holy, righteous, and just, and he cannot be in the presence of sin. So this horrible disease of ours separates us from the God who created us. And the bad news gets worse. There isn't anything you or I can do to make ourselves right with God. We are dead in our sins and on our way to an eternity separated from God. But that's not God's will for us. See, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God did what only God could do. He made a way for us to be reconciled to him through Jesus Christ. Jesus came into the world to save sinners like you and me. While we were still sinners, storing up God's anger against us for our rebellion and disobedience, Christ died for us. Jesus took the punishment that you and I deserve and have earned. Jesus is the substitute for your punishment and mine. Now, isn't that some good news? The word gospel means good news. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that you and I broke God's law and Jesus paid the fine. When we place our faith and trust in Jesus, we get to experience God's grace and mercy. Our gratitude should turn us from our rebellious and disobedient sin toward God, seeking after Him and His righteousness. When we do, God gives us a new heart and a new mind. Praise God for His goodness, and remember, God loves, humans sin, Jesus saves.
Agreed. Yeah. So there's a couple different things that you're talking about. And so I'm going to let you decide which direction you want to go in first. But one of the things you're talking about is being able to prioritize your spending so that if there is a deficit, you know what it is that needs to go away. And you know what? Sometimes you need to figure out what needs to go away, even if there is no deficit, because it actually isn't serving you anymore. And it's sometimes we just keep doing the same thing over and over because it's what we've done over and over. But if it doesn't serve you anymore, it's time to let it go. And that can be seen in lots of different areas of our lives. I mean, my husband, God love him, he still uses the same stupid gel that he used when he was like 16 years old. And his hairdressers have been like, bro, this is actually drying out your hair. Why are you still using it? And I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's because it's what he knows. He doesn't know that he knows that it's bad for him, but it's also what he knows. And so he's not going to let go of that. He'll go to his grave with that stupid hair gel in his hair. I'm sure of it. And so, I mean, I shared that little anecdote just to let people know this is not just about, specific money. It's human behavior. This is what we do. And so you can figure out how to let go of some things, whether you're in a deficit or not. But the other side of that coin, is let's say there's a surplus. What do you get to do with that money? And I said, get to. What do you get to do with that money? Because that's where it starts to get exciting for you. And it won't be exciting. It'll just feel like it's just going to leave your pocket if you don't get intentional with what it is you want to do. And so those are the two sides of this coin I think we're talking about today.
Yeah, so let's tackle the first side that you brought up, just for listeners who are thinking to themselves, okay, I need to start prioritizing. And maybe it's easy to identify a couple of things that aren't priority, but there are plenty of things that are a priority. So how does one start to prioritize all of their different expenses?
That's obviously not a question you don't want me to answer. Okay, so
it was not rhetorical.
All right. One of the things that I say is important is to identify, first of all, are you single? Or are you in this with somebody else? That's going to be one of the important things, because if you're single, you only have your own values to consider. If you are married, however, you have the values of somebody else that you have to consider. And if you're a family, you've got the values of many that need to be considered. Now, some might say, well, the kids aren't contributing anything. What does it matter what they value? I think it's actually important to be able to know as a family what it is we value, because it actually gets some skin in the game from them too. They have buy-in at that point. So that's important. So your question was, how do we identify those things? Is that ultimately what you asked?
Them.
How do we prioritize them? Well, one of the favorite questions that I have for clients, is if you had all of your screens taken away from you, what would you do with your time?
Ooh. Okay. Do you want me to? No, you
no,
want me to?
That was rhetorical.
Okay,
just telling you what but I've been letting you sit with it for a second. I will ask you this though: why is that such a powerful question for people? Do you think?
It really starts to shift perspective, right?
How so?
I think you had mentioned basically at the top about how we live in a microwave society of everybody wants everything like instantaneously and now. And part of that is we want to kind of be entertained right now, or we want to be occupied or even preoccupied with something. And we need to be focused on this, or we need to be focused on that. So if the computer was taken away and I couldn't focus on work, and if the phone was taken away so I couldn't focus on social media, and if the TV was taken away so that I couldn't just escape into fantasy land, it would make me look at life through a different perspective. I would look at the time spent with family differently. I would look at the time spent reading the word and in prayer differently. I would look at time spent in physical exercise differently. So yeah, it was just a powerful question because it really takes away a lot of the distractors and a lot of that. I need to be hit with dopamine right now. So I'm just going to get lost in one of these many screens.
Yeah. And, I'm really glad that you answered the way you did, because my follow up with them as they're talking to me, I don't tell them I'm going to do this, but I actually have 2 columns that I'm writing down their responses in. And one column is time with self, and the other one is time with others, and with and for self, with and for others. And it's so interesting to hear people first of all, they don't respond right away because they, like you, have to just kind of take a step back and go, I don't know. I've never had a moment without a screen in my life. And so they really have to think about it. But when they start giving some of the responses, I like to then reflect back to them which ones are stuff that's for them and which ones are stuff with others. Why this is so powerful, though, is because it's not just that, like you mentioned, the dopamine, the constant dopamine drip. We actually have dopamine drips with other non-screen related things. It's just that we have forgotten all about them. And those things have kind of gone to the wayside. And so we need to rediscover those things. We need to reconnect with the things that bring us true joy in life and true contentment and true entertainment. I mean, I didn't say you couldn't have any entertainment, right? I mean, we can read a book and get into that fantasy land. Like you mentioned, like there is a way to do that. We just have to let our brains think about that a little bit harder rather than having this one-dimensional screen that's right in front of us. And so that's one of the reasons I asked that question so early on. And I think that that's going to help people to prioritize what are some of their things. One of the things that I've noticed is that once they can imagine a world without as many screens, now I know we're not going to take them all away. I know that's not going to happen. But once they can actually start to imagine what their lives would look like without as many of them, they can start to fill in the gaps with some other activities. And they might say, you know what? I don't need this subscription to Netflix anymore. I don't need this particular thing anymore because I want to fill that in with something else. I've always wanted to be a painter, not me personally, but I've always wanted to be a painter, and now I have the opportunity to do that. So I might have to put into my budget paints, canvas, a couple of things that weren't there before, but I can now remove this other one. And it really starts to realign the budget. And you're not just looking at the numbers anymore. You're looking at what do those numbers represent for you?
Yeah. So by my estimation, it sounds like when I think about a budget, I'm really thinking top down, right? I'm very pragmatic in like, hey, what's at the top? What's down at the bottom? It seems as though right now we're talking about some things that would kind of be, in my mind, towards the bottom, because there's some things that just absolutely need to be prioritized at the top of everybody's budget that I think go overlooked far too often. And you and I have been at this for a while. I've coached enough people now to just understand that there's this really odd but very consistent behavior out in the world, which is I pay all of my obvious bills. I pay the rent or the mortgage. I pay my car payment, my car insurance. And I do all these things. And then I look around to see do I have any money in the checking account to go and buy food? Can I put gas in the car to get to work? No. So now I'm going to have to turn to a credit card or whatever. And so there seems to be a lack of prioritization over some, what I would call very basic needs.
So how do we fix that?
Oh, well, I'm so just prescriptive, right? Like you're more of the, let me draw it out of you. But I say, whenever I sit down with a new client, it's the very first one is putting food on the table. You have to prioritize feeding yourself and your family. And it is amazing to me how uncomfortable people seem to be starting there. And for a number of reasons, right? Whether it's I spend too much on food, whether that's a combination of grocery store and eating out, but people think, oh, I'm spending way too much, or I'm not spending money on the right type of food. Whatever shame, guilt is around that, I find a lot of people are uncomfortable starting there, but that's where I start with everybody is you have to prioritize. I was about to say nourishing yourself and your family. I've never really called it that before, and I don't want that to come with any shame, like you are buying the wrong things, but you have to feed yourself and your family.
Mm-hmm. So when you have a client who is presenting with all of the shame and guilt around having this be one of the first things, what do you do with that? How do you help them overcome that so that they then can put that as number one for themselves and their family?
I think I spend not a lot of time, but very efficiently and just kind of quickly talk about the importance of feeding your family and how you shouldn't be ashamed of that. So let's just look at historically what have those numbers look like. Let's talk about the size of your family and their needs, and give them just some guardrails for what is reasonable. And reasonable is a relative term. I need everybody who's listening to hear that, right? What's reasonable to you might not be reasonable to me, and vice versa. But putting out some examples to help people get a reasonable gauge. So one of the things I do is I say, on average, the American family will spend about $200 to $250 per person, per household, on food every month. So if you would take 200 and you're a family of four, that's $800 in groceries or food a month. And then when people can see what they're doing and compare it to that, maybe they're only spending $600, and now they have permission to spend more. Or maybe they're spending more and they feel like they need to spend less, but we have a conversation about their family needs and through just mapping out an appropriate number for them, just try to take the shame away. Like, don't worry about what the number is and just let's make it a priority.
Is it okay if I'm a little contrarian?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
You are
it's why you brought me on, I'm sure.
Partner in this company. You can be up to 1/3. You can be contrarian.
Okay. Well, thankfully, I agree with everything you just said. So I don't need to be contrarian with any of that. The part that I'm going to be a little contrarian with is the idea of guilt and shame. And the reason I'm going to go there is because at the top of this episode, we started talking about what people want or they think they want and what they actually want. And I know that a lot of people think they want this, guilt-free zone, everything is safe. There's no shame. And I understand where they're coming from with that. And so those of you who are listening, and maybe you've never heard my voice before, and you're going to be like, oh, I'll never listen to that again because what she's about to say, don't do that, okay? Because just hear me out.
Hey there, budgeteers. Are you tired of feeling like your finances are running the show? Well, it's time to flip the script and take charge of your money with New Money Habits Financial Coaching. This isn't your typical financial advice. New Money Habits is about empowering you with the knowledge and tools you need to make savvy money moves and build a solid financial foundation. Here's the deal. We're offering a free discovery session to kickstart your journey to financial freedom. Yep, you heard me right. Free. In this session, one of our experienced coaches will help you to pinpoint your financial goals and create a better plan for your money. We're talking about mastering your money mindset, picking up practical money management skills, and having someone to hold you accountable along the way. So, if you're ready to kiss financial stress goodbye and say hello to a brighter financial future, then schedule your free session today to create the new money habits you need to achieve financial freedom.
I think that sometimes the guilt and shame, if it's healthy, are some of those guardrails that are put in for ourselves. And it's kind of like I want to say it's kind of like our conscience that is stirring up a little bit inside. So when somebody like Nino comes to us and says, I want to talk about, being the first thing, and they start to get uncomfortable with that, I think sometimes that's just their conscience talking to them. It very well might be that they do spend more than they are actually comfortable with on eating out or on groceries. And some of that cannot be avoided. Some of that cannot, because there is circumstantial stuff around us, of course. But if they're truly uncomfortable about it, it's okay to explore that a little bit, find out what about that makes them uncomfortable. Because if that guilt is the thing that is like a guardrail for them, and they're like, I really do know how important it is to put food on the table, but I have this obsession with going out, or I'm a compulsive eater-outer, that might not be something that's good for them. And so I think if we in good intention are willing to just not even address guilt and shame because it's uncomfortable for us as coaches to do that, we might be taking away for them some of those built-in guardrails. And so that's the only thing I'm going to say. And hopefully you don't lose too many listeners based on that little thought.
I think what you're outlining there is a level of accountability and conviction. Right?
Yeah.
It goes back to me wanting to clean up my tax mess, is that I'm being convicted to do so. And so you're right. What I do try to do is get rid of guilt and shame around what the behaviors are now, to focus on what the behaviors can become.
Yes.
Right. So,
yes.
And so I hear what you're saying, though. Sometimes the guilt and the shame are the things that kind of drive us to that point that, like, okay, now I need something to change. And I think a lot of times it's also the living without a plan. And since I live without a plan for money, and that plan, since there is no plan, obviously I don't have a plan for how I'm going to feed for myself, what that's going to look like, how much I'm going to spend on it. It just feels like a weird spot to start, because it's not the mortgage, right? Like the mortgage is easy. The mortgage is what it is. And let's put that at the top of the list. But it goes back to what I said about so many people paying all the obvious bills,
right?
That they're not necessarily prioritizing things like feeding their family.
Yeah, I agree. A good discussion around that.
Yeah.
I also want to say that I think oftentimes, guilt sometimes is that internal feeling, and shame is often something that's put upon us by somebody else. So I don't necessarily think it's a super healthy all the time, but I just do want to let people know if you're feeling something like that, it is important to look into it and just say, why is that stirred up for me, and how do I fix it? And I think what you're doing with people, Nino, is exactly what they need when you're saying, here's why it might be feeling that way. Let's create that plan so that you can rid yourself of that. And don't let those things be the thing that keep you from seeing a coach. It's the exact opposite, actually. What I'm saying is let those things be the thing that nudge you to go and see somebody about why you're feeling that way.
Yep. And so after putting food on the table, we teach that you got to keep a roof over your head. You got to keep the lights on, the water running, and you got to make sure you can get to and from work, which then we can have a similar conversation about gasoline and just gassing up your car.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, it's one of those things that people do traditionally kind of at the end, like, do I have enough money to do that? If not, I'm going to turn to a credit card. And I'd rather our listeners and our clients really focus on these top priorities. And I'll even squeeze in there on our helpful payday power planner. It's called the modern day necessities, right? Because we're getting to a point where life without the internet and life without a cell phone is getting more and more difficult. And so it's take care of these things, then take care of the debts and the subscriptions, and enjoy your money and do these other things.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. What about the other side of the coin that you presented earlier?
On what to do with their surplus.
Yes.
How do you get to do that? Well, one of the things that I like to do with individuals is actually have some discussion around that before there is even a surplus. So that's just to kind of get them excited about, well, when we actually do have the surplus, here are some of the things that are on the table. And I like to have people identify maybe 3, no more than 5 priorities that they would put on there. I mean, the idea of priorities being plural is silly almost, because, then it's really not a priority if you've got more than one.
Mm.
But 3 to 5 areas that they're like, I would actually feel really good about spending in these areas, saving in these areas. It doesn't have to be spend, it could be save. But they get to decide what those things are. And then we like to play around with percentages. And the reason for that is because sometimes it's easier to, when you don't know how much surplus it's going to be. It might not be the same every single month. So when you don't know how much it's going to be, you can play with percentages. But I also think it's important to have ideas of how much you want in those particular areas. And so I actually have a calculator that shows, how you can name these things, identify the number that you would like it to actually grow to in that account or in that category, if you will. And then out of the surplus money that you have, what percentage do we put to each of these so that we can identify quickly which one is fastest, the one that we're going to grow fastest. And that, just like I said, gets people excited about, okay, I want to actually work to have a surplus now. It becomes almost like a game for them. And if we don't do it ahead of that, then sometimes it can feel like it drags on forever until we get a surplus. And then by the time we get there, they're like, I don't even know what I'd want to do with it anymore. So
I really like that. I really like the idea of talking about what to do with a surplus before you even have one.
Yeah.
I'm going to start implementing that into my conversations before we start mapping out the first plan. So we don't even know if we have a surplus or a deficit yet, but if there's a surplus, where are we going to focus? I really like that and appreciate that. So let's kind of wrap it up with some key takeaways and what our listeners can do following listening to this episode and how they can kind of apply that to their own plan. And for me, it starts with, first, you got to have a plan. So as you're sitting down and you're writing down that plan, start thinking through the prioritization. The encouragement that I mentioned before and I would give again is it starts with putting food on the table, keeping a roof over your head, keeping the lights and water running, and getting to and from work. So within that, it's what are you spending at the grocery store? What is your rent or mortgage? How much are your utilities? Is there a car payment, car insurance, and gasoline? From there, I would imagine most people are still in a surplus. So it's like now it's time to take a look at things like subscriptions, what I like to call enjoying your hard-earned money a bit. Mm-hmm. And so listing out all of your expenses at that point, and then you can prioritize them, right? So it's got to be down on paper first, but then you can stare at them, start to prioritize them, and do so by all the things that you were sharing earlier about values and aligning and prioritizing based off of what you value and what you want to accomplish, what you actually want versus just what you think you want.
Yeah. If I could just for a second go back to the part about, when you first list those top 4 or 5 things that we're saying are absolutely essential for you. I think one of the places that people get stuck, and you're right, there's probably a surplus from there, but maybe not a surplus for all of the things that they really want to have on there. I like earlier, Nino, when you talked about how you kind of give a guideline. We'll just use the groceries, for example, or the food budget of $200 per person. I would really encourage people to recognize what is it that you're actually spending now. So don't forget that part of it when you're creating this plan, because we can write down our plans all day long. But if we have not been in a habit of doing that at that level for very long, we're not going to actually stick to the actual plan. So you have to know what it is you're dealing with before you try to implement this plan. So for example, if you're a family of 6 and you would have a suggested budget of $1,200 given the $200 per person, and you go back 3 months to look at your credit card statements or your bank account, however you've been spending, and you just start to identify where have we actually spent on the food and how much has it been. If you're at like $2,000 a month, then you're going to have to ask yourself a couple questions. One, is that the actual number that you need? Because if it is, given the circumstances that we talked about, and Nino mentioned, this is just a suggestion, right? So ask yourself, is that the number you actually need? If it's not, then ask yourself, where can you cut back in that specific category? And then you can get that number to one that's actually more realistic for yourself. But remember, we do want realistic. We want doable because we want you to do it. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that in there. And you could do that with gas too. We do want you to be able to go to and from work. We want you to be able to go pick up your kids from school, those kinds of things that are in there. But maybe your gas budget is higher than you would like it. And you realize, well, if I'm being honest, it's because, I make 500 trips a week to this other place over here, and I really don't need to do that. So there's no shame in it. There's no guilt. It's just, what is the reality for you, and where can you cut back even within those categories to give yourself more surplus for the rest?
Yeah. I appreciate that. Recently, and by recently, I mean within maybe the last 12 to 18 months, Christina and I had sat down to talk a little bit about, with rising gas prices, like, do we really want to increase the gas budget, or do we just want to be a little bit more strategic about not just jumping in the car any old time and going any old place, but thinking about, and now she does, like, she thinks about, like, I have a stop I need to make either for a purchase or a return. But you know what? I'll be in that part of town on Thursday. So I'll just wait until Thursday to do that instead of making the trip today and then being out there Thursday as well. And so it's just these little things that make big differences. Little things make big differences.
Yeah. And I like your word strategic, and it falls right in with intentional. And that's really what we're looking at here. So great example.
Yeah. Well, this has been just a fantastic conversation, Maria. I'm so pleased to have had it with you, to give encouragement to our listeners about the importance of prioritizing and getting them thinking about not just what they think they want, but what they actually want, and putting some real steps to how do I start to implement that. So thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That does it for this episode of the New Money Habits podcast. Remember, if you have any questions, make sure to hit us up on social at New Money Habits and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review to help us spread this message of hope to people looking for a better plan for their money.